again here shortly and over the next few months. We have two items on the agenda today. The first is going to be a presentation. Brandon with council staff is going to give us a presentation on the ecosystem approach to fisheries management update. And then we're going to be joined by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's board, summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass, to talk about finalizing the amendment on sector allocations that we've been working on for quite a while, and we have plenty of time on the calendar, or on the schedule, I guess, to talk through that throughout the rest of the day. So those are the two things that we have.
See if Brandon's there. Brandon, you ready to go?
Those are the two things that we have on the schedule for today, and I'd like to start off with going over to Brandon for his presentation on ecosystems approaches.
Brandon, are you there?
Great, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and good morning, Council. And I also saw some board members chiming in, so I appreciate your time this morning. And I'm really going to give an update on two topics for the most part: our summer flounder management strategy evaluation project, and then a project that I'm a co-principal investigator on with some researchers from Rutgers University looking at short-term climate change distribution shifts. And you all received an update from me on both of these topics back in October. And so today's focus is really to cover what has happened on both of those projects since October. And so, as I always like to do with any of these ecosystem discussions, is really to take a step back first and to remind the council sort of why we're doing a management strategy evaluation, and give a quick background on the steps that we took to get us here. If you all recall, back in 2016, you had approved, through your ecosystem approach to fisheries management guidance document, you would agree to a very deliberative and structured process in terms of how you would incorporate ecosystem factors into your management decision process. And that first step was really to begin to prioritize and evaluate risks to all of your different fisheries. And so the first thing, back in 2017, we completed the first EAFM risk assessment that looked at different risk indicators across biological, social, economic factors that you all came up with, to look at what those greatest risks were across all of your different fisheries. And what came out of that is where you decided to focus in on was on summer flounder. Summer flounder was tied with black sea bass to have the most high risk factors that you were considering at the time. And so we decided to move forward with evaluating summer flounder. And so the next step in the process is there's lots of issues going on with summer flounder. Where do we really want to focus those efforts in? And so we conducted a conceptual model, and so that we could begin to hone in on what kinds of management questions you would want to consider regarding the summer flounder fishery. So we developed this conceptual model that looked at all of those high risk factors from the risk assessment and made all of those ecosystem connections between all of those risk factors within the summer flounder fishery. And at the end of all of that, we presented you all with a series of management questions that could potentially be answered given the information that we have and looking at the ecosystem connections that we developed that you all may want to consider. And that was in December of 2019. And at that point, you agreed to move forward with a management strategy evaluation. And so we started that last year, and we continued to move forward. And so just to refresh your memory, what you all decided back in December of 2019 was really to focus in on recreational summer flounder discards and ways to evaluate the biological and economic benefits of minimizing both live and dead discards, and how we can convert discards into landings within the recreational sector. And you wanted us to identify those management strategies to realize those benefits. And so this figure on your left is the conceptual model that we developed. And what it's showing here is the linkages, the ecosystem linkages regarding discards and all of the different areas that it intersects with. So it looks, it has implications and is connected to summer flounder distributional shifts and summer flounder recruitment. It's connected to seafood production and recreational value. It's looking at fleet diversity. So there's a lot of different areas where discards is related to the entire ecosystem. And so you thought that was a really good way to evaluate an issue that the council is working on generally across all of its species, how we can minimize discards. And so you thought it was a good way to sort of take our traditional management that you all are always working on and how we can intersect it with this ecosystem approach. And so this is the management strategy evaluation project that we're working on. And just real quickly, why are we doing management strategy evaluation? What is it? And this is just a really sort of high level, just to refresh your memory. Again, it's really, this is a tool to help us evaluate different strategies. So what regulations or what harvest control rules would you want to consider that achieve different specified management objectives? And so you need to come up with those. What are we trying to achieve out of this project? And it allows you to test these different strategies before you implement them. So we can see which strategies may not work as well to achieve the goals and objectives that you specify before we do anything. And so it's a really good way to evaluate and balance these trade-offs, doing it within an ecosystem context to understand what is the best way to move forward and what sort of strategies may we want to implement to help reduce discards and address this situation within the recreational fishery. And unlike the conceptual model, which was just a qualitative assessment, we weren't doing any sort of quantitative modeling behind the scenes. It was really just looking at things and making those connections. Here within management strategy evaluation, we're actually going to develop quantitative models. We're going to have a biological model. We're going to have an economic model, and we're going to simulate the population, all of these different ecosystem drivers. And then we're going to look at different management strategies that we may want to implement and see how those things interact. So if we were to implement a particular management strategy, such as reducing the minimum size in the recreational summer flounder fishery, what are the implications then on the biological side? We feed that into the model, and then again, it's this sort of iterative loop of implementing something, seeing what it does to the population drives things, which then has implications for the management side. And so you continue to evaluate how these different strategies achieve your outcomes. But we need to be clear that this one project isn't going to specify a single outcome. It won't identify the single bullet to address all of our issues that we want to try to address. We may have multiple objectives that we want to accomplish, and there isn't going to be one thing that sort of addresses everything, but you're going to evaluate these trade-offs to see which different combination of strategies or what singular strategy both, maximizes and achieves the most that you want out of the fishery. And a key part of identifying those clear objectives and strategies is including stakeholders within the process. And so this is going to be a big area of my focus of my discussion this morning, is on this stakeholder process that we've taken so far. And so here's sort of an outline of the different stakeholder initiatives that we've undertaken or that we're proposing to do. So when we first started this, actually you got a little bit of this back in October, we started with a kickoff webinar mock workshop with our advisory panels, with our ecosystem approach to fisheries management, AP, with our summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass, AP, and the commission's summer flounder, black sea bass, and scup, AP. And the technical work group that's working behind the scenes on all of this sort of thought the AP would be the major area where we would focus our efforts. And so we held this mock workshop, this kickoff webinar mock workshop back in September of 2020, really just to present the concepts of management strategy evaluation to our AP, most people, and including council members, aren't really familiar with management strategy evaluation. It's new to our council, but it has been used on other councils, and there is some mixed perceptions about how well management strategy evaluation works or doesn't work. And so we thought having this kickoff webinar with the AP members would be a good way to sort of get folks engaged, thinking about how we are going to use this approach within this project. Like I said, the technical work group thought we would spend a lot of time working with our AP, but after that kickoff webinar mock workshop, we took a step back and thought we needed to do a lot more work and outreach in regards to, getting feedback from more stakeholders than just AP members. Certainly AP members are a critical component to that, but we thought we wanted to cast as much input and cast as wide of a net as we potentially could. So we came up with these additional initiatives, one building on the other, starting with an online scoping feedback form where we would get a broad, we could get, anybody could conduct this online scoping feedback. We could get as much input as we possibly could. That would filter into regional management strategy evaluation workshops. So we could use the information from the scoping feedback, help target our discussions at the regional workshops. Then we could take all of that information from both the feedback form and the regional workshops and filter that into core stakeholder groups. And I'll touch upon all of these different things here in the next few slides. And again, but we really wanted stakeholder input early so that we could get all of the ideas and concepts out and figure out which things we want to move forward with, and we want to make sure that stakeholders are engaged throughout the process. This is just a quick overview of the stakeholder scoping feedback that we conducted. This was back in January. It was up for about 2 weeks, from January 11th to January 25th. And in there were a combination of mandatory closed-ended questions where a participant had to check a specific box and give us an answer to a particular question. And we also had a series of optional questions that were open-ended. So if we were missing something in one of those closed-ended questions, people could provide additional details or additional thoughts somewhere else. And so it gave us an opportunity to evaluate data in sort of different categories, which was really helpful. And we covered a lot of different topics on these questions. We were looking at, input on folks' discards concerns, what potential management objectives we would want to consider, what strategies we should implement to achieve those objectives, what data sources might be out there that folks on the technical work group might not be familiar with or might not know about, and what are our unknowns or what are the uncertainties within the system that we should be thinking about. And as part of this feedback, we were also looking for a solicitation for core stakeholder groups. Again, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but if someone expressed interest in becoming a core stakeholder group member, we collected additional information from those people, where we were able to collect information such as fishing background and fishing experience, what state they were from, what stakeholder group they represented. So we were able to collect some finer scale information from a subset of participants in this scoping feedback. And so we had a really strong response to this online questionnaire. We had 818 individual responses, with at least one response from each state, from Massachusetts to North Carolina. So we covered the entire management unit. And then we had 285 responses with that additional demographic information. So those folks that expressed interest in the core stakeholder group, we were able to pull that information out. And again, we were able to use all of that for looking at things at a regional analysis that I'll discuss in a little bit. And so all of this information helped us focus our discussions at these regional workshops, and we'll continue to utilize this information as we move through the management strategy evaluation project. To give you a sense of the response and the breakdown of the response on this online scoping feedback, over 60% of the respondents were from New Jersey, followed by North Carolina, then Massachusetts, and New York. Those 4 states made up over 90% of all of the respondents, and we got some respondents in much smaller quantities in all of those different areas. I would say that New Jersey, North Carolina, Massachusetts, those states also sent out emails to their listserv groups about this online opportunity to make public comment. And so those states that sort of sent out those email reminders, it seemed like we got a lot more feedback from those particular states. And then when you look at the respondents by stakeholder group, here over 80% of the respondents were private recreational anglers, either from the shore mode or from the private boat angler. And so this is different than what we traditionally get when the council is getting public comment. The majority of the time, not always, but certainly the majority of the time, the people that we tend to hear from are more the for-hire industry. We certainly hear from private boat anglers at times, but really the recreational shore angler, we don't hear a lot of information from. We don't get a lot of feedback. So this was a really unique opportunity where we got a lot of input from those private anglers. And so they had some unique perspectives to offer. So it was really interesting. I'm not going to go through all of the details and the results of the analysis. The other document in your briefing book gives a lot more detail on these things. I just want to provide two take-home messages with this slide here. The figure on the left-hand slide with the blue and red bars, I want to show here is the blue bars represent all 818 respondents to a particular question. And then the red bars are those 285 individuals where we were able to collect state and regional information from. So what we were looking to see here is how representative those regional or state-only responses were, and how representative was it of all 818 respondents. And this is just for one question. This is in regards to discard concerns and how much someone selected a particular discard concern option as a major concern. But as you can see here, the state-only regional respondents, their feedback was essentially the same as it was for all 818 respondents for this question, and when you look at this information across all of the other questions. So that was really helpful to us to show that these regional responses, as we start to break down the information and looking at it at a regional level, it is reflective of all 818 responses that we got. So that was one key take-home message. And then the other one is on the figure on the right-hand side. This is looking at the responses by the different regions. So Massachusetts to Connecticut, New York to Delaware, and Maryland to North Carolina. And while there is some variability between the different options here for this particular question, in general, the New York to Delaware and Maryland to North Carolina regions, their answers look much more similar than the Massachusetts to Connecticut region. So there were certainly some regional differences between these areas depending upon the question, but generally New York to North Carolina had a more similar response than that of Massachusetts to Connecticut. However, when you look at just the top 5, so either the top 5 discard concerns, the top 5 management objectives, or the top 5 strategies, when you look across all of those regions or you look across all respondents, you see a lot of similarities. And so this table just looks at the management objectives, so just one of the questions. And if you see a similar color across all of the different regions here, you'll be able to sort of visualize where things came out across all of the different regions. So for example, you see the red boxes. Minimize the mortality of released summer flounder was a top management objective identified for all respondents and all 3 regions. The same thing with improve the quality of the recreational fishing experience was a management objective that was a top priority for all respondents and all 3 regions. And so you see a lot of similarities across all the different regions and where they think the council and the board should focus their management objectives. There were a little bit more difference when you look at strategies, but again, you see these common themes across all the different groups here, so which was really interesting to see. So even though when you look at an individual like objective or an individual concern or strategy, there are some differences. When you look at what's the most what are the top priorities, you see a lot of similarities across the groups. So those were that was just a quick overview of the responses that we got to those very closed-ended questions where you had to select things. And we also, like I said, we had these open-ended questions where, again, they were optional, but we had a lot of people submit comments on these open-ended questions. In some of them, we had more than 450 individual responses to these open-ended questions, and they were very detailed. Some of them were a paragraph long and had lots of different ideas. And so those responses were really fantastic, but it does make it much more challenging to sort of evaluate and how we pull like relevant pieces of information out of that feedback. And so this is just one example here that the technical work group had done. We use these word clouds to kind of pull out common words or common phrases that were used by stakeholders within these open-ended questions. And so this is in regards to discard concerns, again, where we had over 400 people provide additional detail and responses. We were able to take all of those responses and sort of find common categories across all of the different responses that we received. And so they all kind of fell into these 6 different broad categories, where a lot of responses were in regards to the commercial fishery, or enforcement and education, regulations, gear and tackle, management, and science and data. And we were even able to further refine these within these broad categories. We were able to find common themes within each of these different categories. And I'll just give a couple of examples. So within the commercial fishery, one of the comments that we got quite a bit was in regards to the lower size limit for the commercial sector and the 14-inch minimum size on the commercial side. And the responses were varied, indicating that that's inequitable, for the recreational sector, that the commercial sector has this 14-inch minimum size, that 14-inch minimum size results in additional discards. So there were all sorts of comments related to that, but you could then again begin to bin responses within the commercial fishery, then into these themes in regards to the minimum size limit on the commercial side. Or within regulations, we got a lot of feedback on slot limits. And so you could bin, and people had all different types of ideas on what slot limit should look like or what a maximum size limit should be. So you were able to bin all of those responses underneath the regulations. You could put it into the theme of slot limits. And so it really helped us sort of take, a really unmanageable amount of data that we received and put it into some concrete areas so that we can evaluate the information going forward. And so this is just an example of why we want to do that, because we want to look at all of the feedback that we received, but we want to see, whether or not those ideas and concepts can actually be implemented. Can we consider them within this management strategy evaluation project? Is it possible? Do we have data? Can we model any of these ideas? Is it within the scope of this project? And I'll just run through a couple of examples here. So again, within that commercial fishery responses that we were getting, another common theme was that we should ban the use of commercial gill nets, bottom trawls, and small mesh. So we could model, removing those sectors of the commercial fishery out of the population. We could evaluate what those impacts are through a model, but this project isn't going to evaluate, getting rid of the commercial bottom trawl fishery. So it's not really within the scope of this management strategy evaluation project. So we wanted to make sure we could categorize all of the different feedback that we got. The same thing with angler education programs. We got a lot of feedback that we need to provide information on proper handling and safe release and how you release gut hooked fish and all of these kinds of things. And so we don't have any sort of detailed data on proper handling per se, but we could model that as a proxy, because if recreational fishermen implement some proper handling techniques, if we do some more education and outreach in regards to safe releasing or proper releasing of gut hooked fish, in theory, that would lead to a change in our recreational discard mortality rate. And so that's what we can model. We can model a change in the discard mortality rate. And so that's something we could probably address within a model. And it's probably something we would want to evaluate within the scope of this management strategy evaluation, is how we do some more education on proper handling and minimize either the mortality of discarded summer flounder. So those sorts of things where we have proxies set up. And then there are other feedback that we got, such as increasing opportunities to keep a fish, or increasing angler satisfaction, or lower the size limits, or implement a maximum size limit. We can model all of those. We can evaluate those things within the biological model or the economic model. So those are yeses. And those are probably within the scope of this management strategy evaluation. We're going to look for opportunities. What regulations could we implement to increase opportunities to keep a fish, increase angler satisfaction? Well, I'm sure we'll look at lowering the size limit or slot limits and all of those things. So those things can be modeled. And then there's this last sort of category where we got a lot of feedback on the loss of summer flounder habitat or the impacts of beach replenishment. And so the technical work group isn't quite sure if there's the potential to model those things. You know, it would likely be through a proxy. So loss of summer flounder habitat or the impacts of beach replenishment are likely to have impacts on stock productivity. And so maybe we could do some modifications and sort of evaluate those habitat impacts through some sort of other mechanism within the model. And so that's a maybe. And whether or not this kind of information, again, we're looking at things in an ecosystem context, so we will certainly want to consider these things, but how much we're going to consider it within the scope of the management strategy evaluation is certainly unclear at this point. So those things are maybes. And so really this was just to highlight, we're taking all of this information that we're receiving, putting it into all of these bins and understanding whether or not we can model it and how we can incorporate it into a management strategy evaluation. So it's really important to provide all of these sorts of details and let the public know that we are really looking at all of the feedback and input that we're getting. And this is just, I just throw this up here. Again, the technical work group continues to evaluate the data that we got from that online scoping form. One of the work group members had some of his students develop this web page here, and this is going to be something we're continuing to work on, but we're going to make this available on the council's website, where anybody can go in and really dive into all of the different data that we received through the online scoping. So you can look at a particular state and what those responses were, and you can look at a particular state by a particular sector. So if you were interested in how charter boat captains within North Carolina responded, you could select those two and it can show you the results of and the feedback that we got from that particular sector in that particular state. Again, so we have a little bit more work to do, but I would encourage you to go back and visit our website, and you'll be able to see this information at some point and really dive into all the data that we received. And so all of that information then fed into these regional management strategy evaluation stakeholder workshops. And so it was a similar approach that we took for the online scoping, where we were covering very similar topics. Stakeholder participation could be very broad. Anybody could join one of these workshops, but it was a much more structured process and more interactive because we're able to talk to one another and sort of dive into some of the issues a little bit more. But we were able to take all of the feedback that we got through that online stakeholder feedback and sort of focus our discussion here during these regional workshops. And during those regional workshops, we had a series of introductory presentations about the EAFM process and how we got to management strategy evaluation, an overview of the basics of management strategy evaluation, and then sort of a summary of those scoping results that I had just showed you, but we showed it at a much more information at each region. We were able to provide those results so that people could respond to what other people were saying within those regions. And then we also talked about the core group. So we just wrapped up our last regional workshop last night, and I apologize to Tony and Adam, who have heard many of these slides already 3 times before. So I apologize for you all having to hear it for a 4th time, but it was great to have some council members join in and listen to hear what the discussion was. And so we just wrapped those things up. the technical work group is getting together next week to talk about the feedback. The feedback was really good. The turnout was a little lighter than I was hoping, but that's okay. We got a lot of really good feedback. They confirmed a lot of the information that we had received through the online survey, but they were able to give us some additional details and other things to think about, like spatial issues that maybe weren't sort of fleshed out as much within that online scoping. So I think the regional workshops were really productive, and just need to take a little time now to digest all of the information that we got there. And then we'll move into these core stakeholder groups. And so because working in these larger groups, can be challenging, it can be inefficient, particularly if we have a lot of different people on. And so the plan now is to move into more focused and smaller groups so that we can really begin to dive into the sort of nuts and bolts of this management strategy evaluation and get the feedback that we want from stakeholders. And so we're looking to have a group of about 12 to 15 stakeholders that represent a range of fishery perspectives, represent a range of, the spatial range, the geographic range of the summer flounder fishery. So we want to make sure we're getting people from New England and in North Carolina and certainly New York and New Jersey. So we want to make sure we have a really diverse sort of fishery perspectives and geographical perspectives on this technical work group. And the plan is to have them participate in 3 workshops, and I'll get into the details of those in a little bit. And so, like I said, we've already solicited input and interest in this core group. And we've already had 282 individuals express interest in serving on the core group, and we had another 185 be recommended by their peers. And so, we're only looking to have 12 or 15, and we have, nearly 400 potential people. So we have a little bit of, weeding to go through and reviewing all of these potential applicants. And so the technical work group has already begun to review the interest, and we'll be making recommendations soon because we want to get this group together relatively quickly so that we can start moving to the next phase of the management strategy evaluation. And so, but all of this information, the technical work group will sort of make these recommendations. We'll put a document together that will go to the council and board for their review to make sure you all are comfortable with the folks that we have on this core stakeholder group. So stay tuned for that information. So this is a slide similar to what I presented back in October, but just to remind you of sort of the approach that we're going to take from here on out. Again, we're planning these 3 core stakeholder workshops. These are going to take place within the next 8 to 10 months. The first one's probably going to be scheduled for about June. And so I'm trying to align things up appropriately with our different council and board meetings. So the first thing is, that first workshop will focus in on management objectives, performance metrics, all of those things that we've already received a lot of feedback on. So hopefully that first workshop should be pretty streamlined and focused because we already have a lot of data, but we want to sort of hone in on those key objectives and strategies that we really want to focus in on. That second workshop would then look at initial model, development and some preliminary results, get some feedback there. And then the third workshop would look at an updated model and sort of quote unquote final results. So what the plan is, after we have one of these core stakeholder workshops, which again would happen in June, then I would envision sometime in maybe late June, early July, we would get the council committees, the EOP and the Summer Flounder Scup and Black Sea Bass Committee, and a subset of the board to discuss the feedback that we've received from these from the stakeholder workshop and make sure that management is on board, because we don't want to evaluate a strategy or evaluate an objective that you all don't think should be an objective or a strategy we'd want to consider. So once we get the input from the stakeholders, then we're going to touch base with a smaller group of management, and then we'll bring all of that information to the council and board at their joint meetings. So again, we would have that first workshop, for example, in June with the stakeholders, late June, early July with the committees and a subset of the board. And then in August, we would do our next check-in for some direct feedback from the full council and board on how we should continue to move forward. So that second workshop and all those things would happen before the December joint meeting. So you can get a sense of the timing. And so with all of that, even though we added all of these additional Stakeholder feedback, we're still on track to finish this project just as we were when I presented this back in October. Again, so we have, the next thing is really to focus in on finalizing these core stakeholders, who they are going to be. Then we can set up all of those workshops. Those will happen between now and your August joint meeting. Then we'll take all of that feedback, begin simulation model, begin to refine the models and do some simulation runs. We'll bring that feedback back to the stakeholders and the council and board, the second half of the year. Then early next year, we're really going to be, honing in on the final results. So we'll have another set of meetings early in 2022, and so that we can bring you final results where you can look at these different trade-offs associated with the different alternatives and see how they affect and incorporate your management objectives so that you can consider those. Likely, we're looking at April, May of next year. And then those things could be incorporated potentially depending on what you want to do for the 2023 recreational fishery. And so that's it for management strategy evaluation. I just have a couple slides here on this other project. Again, this is looking at short-term forecasts of species distributions in fisheries management. So it's looking at, and we've picked 4 different species, summer flounder, illic squid, spiny dogfish, and gray triggerfish. So 4 different species that have a broad range of life histories. So this is a project being funded by the Lenfest Oceans Program, and this is with Malin Pinsky and Alexa Fredston from Rutgers University. And so they're doing sort of all of the modeling components to all of this, and I'm sort of the liaison here with the council to make sure that the information that we're developing here has some utility to what you all are doing. And so the key here is, you've seen a lot of distribution shifts information already, but it's looking at what distribution shifts may be, 60, 70, 80 years from now. And that's really important information to have. But you all are making decisions at much shorter time scales. You're thinking about things 1 to 5 years out from now. And so this project is really trying to develop potential models looking at climate-driven distribution shifts that are going to take place within the next 1 to 10 years. And so I think this has the potential to have some really valuable information for you all as you begin to make management decisions. And what this particular project is looking at, it's using dynamic range models. There is a number of different modeling approaches going on right now that are looking at some of these more short-term distribution shifts, but this one is focusing in on dynamic range models. And we're really testing to see whether or not this kind of model works for these short-term forecasts, how reliable it is, and what time scales is it reliable, and how well does it fit to these different species and their different life histories. And so it has this spatial population structure, so it's looking at populations at different spatial scales, and we're using survey data to sort of fit the information to that. And then it has the ability to disperse. So how are fish going to move from one patch into another patch? And it's using different life stage information. So we're looking at small juveniles, large juveniles, and adults to see how those different components will move given changes in temperature, looking at temperature dependent growth, temperature dependent fecundity, and how things may move. So it's taking all of the survey data, fitting them to different, biological parameter estimates, looking at growth and reproduction, and then doing simulations run to forecast where these species and the different life stages may be at 1 to 10 years in the future. And so Alexa and Malin are continuing to work on the models. They've completed sort of the process models, fitting all of the survey data. Now we're beginning to move into developing the different parameters, model parameters, and life history information, and fitting those 2 things together. And I think we're going to have most of those finished by the end of the summer for all 4 species. And so just to give you a sense of where we're going with this project, this month we're going to be submitting a manuscript that kind of goes through all of the model methods and those details on the model itself. Some preliminary simulation testing that was done for a test case. Alexa's planning on giving some presentations to a few different scientific symposiums over the course of the summer. one at the Ecological Society of America, and one at the Applied Mathematics. Again, we're looking to try to get feedback, since this is a new model and a different sort of approach. We're trying to get some different feedback on how useful and sort of the approaches that they are planning to take here. So that's why there's some different sort of annual meetings that they're planning to go to. And we're looking to have a webinar with the EOP committee and the AP later this summer or early fall, where we want to present sort of where we are with the project and some preliminary results and get feedback. If you remember, you all provided some feedback when this project first got started. And so now we're about a year and a half into it. We want to come back to you all and get your feedback on where the project is and what what the preliminary results look like, so that we can take that feedback and continue to work on it. Like I said, we have most of the models are fitted for all of the different 4 focal species, and so we hope to have that completed by the end of the summer, again in time to give you all, the EOP committee and AP, some information and some preliminary results. And then next year, it's really to incorporate fishing pressure into the model. And at the end of next year or early 2023 is when the project is set to complete. And my last slide. So today, again, was really just an update on where we've been since October. There's no council action needed today. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you have any thoughts or want to provide any feedback or direction at this point. I threw up this web page here where you can go to, and thanks to Mary, who's done a lot of work with me setting up different web pages and all of our different communications and outreach regarding this project. There's a lot of information. We continue to add things to all of the different pages as we move through this process. And so you go to this page and you can find all of the information. You can link to that initial AP workshop, for example. You can find information about these regional workshops. And so we're beginning to add more and more things to our website. And so with that, I'll take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Appreciate the presentation. I know that we're using a new format here, and I will be the first to admit that it's a little challenging. I've had some challenges this morning, but if anybody has any questions, if you can raise your hand, I might have to scroll through the names. Does anyone have any questions for Brandon or want to make any comments? We've got about 90 people on this list, and I'm looking for hands. I don't see any. Okay, I got a couple hands now. Michelle Duvall, go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not really necessarily a question for Brandon, just, really appreciate all of the work. And also, I'm really impressed with how much feedback was received on the electronic, survey form and how that all fell out. I really appreciate the way that you've broken that down and made it easy to see, what the priorities are regionally among folks. I guess maybe surprised, given that level of participation, that there wasn't more participation in the different, regional meetings. Maybe just some speculation that with other public input opportunities going on and other issues, there might be some stakeholder fatigue. I don't know if that, if y'all considered that, but thanks again, and really looking forward to seeing the results of this.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think that was trying to think of why participation would have been, lower. And I do think maybe fatigue was part of it. We had, the summer flounder, scut black sea bass allocation public hearings were going on just shortly before this. Bluefish is going on right now. I know there's a lot of stuff going on with striped bass. And so I don't know if that was part of it. I reached out to all the state folks before I set up the dates and the times, and wanted feedback if they thought an evening workshop would be better versus like a workshop during the day. And the response was generally that doing it at night was more productive. I know schedules are really challenging. It was even tough for the work group for me to find volunteers to do some of the tasks during our different workshops because people's lives are just sort of really busy at different times. And so I don't know what it was. So I was a little bit disappointed, but a lot of the feedback that we were getting from the workshops, again, sort of aligned with that feedback that we got through the online questionnaire. So I'm glad we got a really strong response to the online questionnaire. There's a lot of data there that seemed to still really apply to the regional workshops that we had and the feedback that we got there. Again, we got some nuances and some different ideas or sort of additional details on some of those questions. But I was a little bummed that the turnout was a little lighter than we had hoped it was going to be.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Michelle. Does anybody else from the council have any questions or comments that they want to make before I go to the public? Adam Nowalski. Go ahead, Adam.
Morning, and thank you very much. And again, as Michelle indicated, I'll also express my thanks to Brandon, all the people on the working group, and everyone working on this. As was noted, the turnout from the survey was very good. I think we all expected to see more than what we saw for the turnout at these regional workshops. I do wonder again if that was a function of the states being involved in helping distribute the information. So maybe there's some learning point there looking forward and what the states were doing different that drove that type of turnout for the online survey versus what I would call very limited participation from the recreational fishing community on these regional workshops. The item I wanted to bring up this morning is during the conversations with the working group, there was conversation about how much of a silver bullet this MSE process could be towards what I think a lot of management and more importantly the public feels is a way forward, that this MSE process would provide a mechanism to get to a lower size limit, increase satisfaction, provide a biological benefit directly. So I was hoping Brandon could touch on for us this morning where he feels at this point, now that we've had a number of working group calls, had a survey sent out, done some regional workshops, what should the expectation be for this council, for the board that jointly manages, for the public about how this process is going to potentially result in a lower size limit?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Sorry, Mike.
No, that's fine.
I can, certainly try to address it. I don't know exactly what all of this is going to provide. I think the general understanding was, or a general, sort of response from the public was just lower the size limit, and that will resolve lots of issues. For example, it will reduce the mortality on large summer flounder, female summer flounder. It will increase angler satisfaction, and but there's already been some analysis that has looked at that, and just by lowering the size limit isn't going to resolve all of our potential issues. Again, because there are lots of different other variables that are intersecting with each other. So changes in angler success rate and changes in the sex ratio when you do lower the size limit in terms of what you're harvesting. All of those things sort of come into play. But what I think this process is going to allow us to do that other analyses have not done is, again, look at once the council and board have identified what are our objectives for this fishery. Is it to increase angler satisfaction? Is it to ensure that the chances of taking home a summer flounder are maximized? Is it to, educate anglers about proper, release mortality? So once we have what those objectives are, I think we can then evaluate a number of different strategies, be it a lower size limit, be it a slot limit, be it changes to the season, or however we want to sort of modify our recreational components, we can evaluate then what those trade-offs are from a biological side and from an economic side. We've never then looked at angler satisfaction. The model, the economic models that we're developing now are looking at angler satisfaction and angler welfare and the economic sort of changes by what you could look at if you were to make some of these changes by modifying the season, or even thinking about how we could maybe look at options for the shore-based fishery, right? Because they probably have access, their availability to larger summer flounder are much more restricted at the shore versus someone in a private boat. And so maybe discard rates are higher for shore anglers. And so maybe there's adjustments you can make there. It's going to allow us to evaluate all of these different scenarios and what that means then from a biological perspective, what it means then from a social and economic perspective. And then you all can see, all right, I'm looking at these trade-offs, and not one option addresses all of our objectives, but maybe this one or maybe this combination of strategies achieve our objectives the best, in terms of what we're really trying to look for. And I think it's going to give you the tools to evaluate which strategies will do that for you that are different than what we've done before. Again, I don't think it's going to be as simple as lower the size limit and everything's going to be okay. There are going to be trade-offs associated with doing that. But now you'll be able to see what those trade-offs are, and then you can make a decision then based off of the information we have, if that's the avenue you want to do. Do you want to then lower size limits because it means X, Y, and Z going forward? And so I think this is going to give you a comprehensive look at evaluating all of those options.
All right, thanks, Brandon, for that. Let me see if anybody else from the council has any more questions or comments at this time before I go to the public. Okay, I don't see any hands coming up. So let me go to Mike Wayne, and then I have David Dow after Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Wayne from the American Sport Fishing Association. Brandon, thanks for the presentation. I appreciate getting the opportunity to participate in those workshops. The question that I had was about the timeline. So I think that this process, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that this process is going to develop alternatives that would likely be included in the specification process, meaning there wouldn't necessarily need to be a change in the FMP to implement any solutions coming out of this process. You did talk a little bit about specific objectives being established. That's an FMP thing from my understanding. And so maybe we can just say those objectives that we do through this process are a subset of the objectives we already have in our FMP, and no change would need to occur there. But I'm just trying to kind of understand, how does this process fit into specifications, what we're doing with recreational management reform, and kind of the process that the council goes through to set measures?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I think, yeah, we are trying to identify objectives because what are we trying to achieve out of this management strategy evaluation? If we don't have any objective that we're trying to achieve, then it's hard to implement strategies to do something if we don't know what we're really trying to achieve. I don't think those objectives are specific to our FMP. Those objectives cover generally all three species within the FMP. I know things just changed for summer flounder recently, but those are sort of broad objectives across all of the different things that the council wants to be thinking about. So I don't think the objectives that we're identifying here specifically tie back into the FMP objectives. I could be wrong. I hadn't really thought about that, but it's really what are we trying to get out of this process and what are we trying to do? To the actual strategies that we may implement, these alternatives that we're going to consider, I do think that many of them, although we haven't fleshed them out in detail yet, I think many of them could be done through the specifications process. And that's why we're trying to get this wrapped up before August of next year, when the council and board begin the process of what are specifications, thinking about what regulations are going to be in the following year. We want to have this information ahead of that, so that if the council and board do want to move forward with implementing a particular strategy or alternative or series of alternatives, they have the time to incorporate that into the general sort of specification and rulemaking process to inform recreational management. So that's really the goal. I think many of them, again, until we get to those details, I think they all can be accomplished through that process, and I think could be then in place by 2023 for the 2023 fishery.
Mr. Chairman, follow up if I can.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Brendan, thanks. That's super helpful. I didn't mean to try to trip this up with the objectives question. I just kind of thought like, okay, I know the objectives are in the FMP, and that's kind of FMP language. So I just wanted to make sure we weren't tripping over ourselves there. And then, yeah, no, it makes sense. So 2023 implementation is the expected use for whatever comes out of this process, assuming it delivers on the time frame that you guys have laid out here. Thanks. I appreciate that info.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brandon. I'm going to go to one last person from the audience, and then we're going to take a break before we convene with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. David Dow.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you just fine.
I'm a retired marine scientist and grassroots environmental activist who lives in Cape Cod. And we have summer flounder moving in to Nantucket Sound and winter flounder moving into Cape Cod Bay and the wider Gulf of Maine. And the question I had is, since climate change seems to be an important factor in this movement of both the prey species and the predators, has the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council process included the NOAA Fisheries Status of Ecosystem Report document conclusions, and also the essential fish habitat changes that might occur because of climate change?
Well, I'll tell you that, and maybe I'll turn to Brandon in a second, but David, to your question, the Mid-Atlantic Council we are planning a process to look at governance structure kind of around the shifts in stocks. We wanted to do that in person. So once we get through this pandemic virtual world, we're hoping to move forward with that. But I don't know, Brandon, do you work a lot more closely with the folks on the ground. Do you have any response or anything you want to say?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, David, for the comment and question. And so I would say, yes, the council has thought quite extensively, and that through this entire process, and I think that's why the council took this very deliberative process of risk assessment, conceptual model building, and this management strategy evaluation. If you look at that conceptual model, habitat and distribution shifts and distribution shifts not only to summer flounder, but as you talked about, to distribution shifts to predators and prey and species interactions. Those things are all things that we thought about and covered within the conceptual model, and how we think about them through this entire process. How those things fit specifically within this management strategy evaluation project is a little less clear, because we're focusing in on recreational discards, but clearly distribution shifts, and as things are moving, that likely plays some sort of role with discarding. And so I think The technical work group that's got a lot of smart folks on it, smarter than me, will be able to think about how we may be able to model those types of components and how that fits into the equation. But it's certainly something we're thinking about in the broader context. How it fits within this specific project is a little less clear until we really start to dive down and start developing the model and thinking about all of these sort of ecosystem things that we can push and pull within the model structure.
Thanks, Brandon. David, did you have any response, or are you good?
That's fine with me.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question. And thanks, Brandon, for your answer. I don't see any additional hands. Let me go back to the council to see if anybody from the council, does anybody have anything that they want to bring up before we call a little bit of a break here? If you just raise your hand. I don't see any hands at this time. So let's do this. I know that we're a little bit over our time limit. I'm going to take a 10-minute break, and we're going to come back at 10:15, and we'll pick up with our colleagues from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board. So 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10:15 and start off the meeting. Thank you.